Good morning. My name is Luis Bonacorso. I'm a third-year law student at NOVA School of Law, joined here today by Sara Santos, a master's student at NOVA. Our guest today is Professor Bahija Jamal, an international law professor from Hassan II University in Casablanca, Morocco, and an experienced practitioner in the fields of human trafficking, human rights, asylum, and migration law. The professor is also the president of the NGO Ofoq Horizon on the protection of victims and of human trafficking, and the consultant on combating human trafficking at the International Organization for Migration and the Council of Europe.
Okay, so this podcast is part of the initiative from Law and Migration Research Group, which is integrated in NOVA Refugee Clinic, which belongs to NOVA School of Law. We have the support of our group's coordinator, Professor Vasco Becker-Weinberg. So the research group is mainly focused on the current maritime route of irregular migration between El Jadida in Morocco and Algarve in Portugal. However, today's episode is going to focus primarily on the interrelation between human smuggling and human trafficking and irregular migration.
So we'll start with the first question, Professor Bahija. Could you explain us the difference and the correlation between human trafficking and human smuggling, please?
Okay, first of all, thank you for inviting me once again, and thank you to all your professors. I'm too much proud of you, and this is an opportunity, as I say, to share the South vision on human trafficking. I see that you have a project on migration, El Jadida, and as your colleague has mentioned, and really we want to establish these bridges between Morocco and Portugal, because we have a very, very good historical relationship. So this is really, I am too much happy, I am too much proud of being your guest today. And I come directly to your questions. Human trafficking, as you know, is the third trade in the world after, trade of drug and weapons. And human trafficking, let me say, it's very, very recently that we have this legal definition of human trafficking, particularly after the adoption of the Palermo Protocol, which is a part of United Nations Convention on Transnational Organized Crime. Coming back to definition, just very, very briefly to Article 3 on human trafficking, because personally I cannot give my own definition, as we have the legal definition which is recognized by all, by the international community and the scholars and practitioners. So human trafficking means the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of person by means of threat and use threat or use of force and other forms of coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, position, the abuse of power, the abuse of position, vulnerability, or abuse of vulnerability, or giving or receiving a payment of or benefit to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. Exploitation means at minimum, after I give an explanation of all that, at minimum, the exploitation of prostitutions or other forms of prostitution, sexual exploitation, and forced labor, services, slavery practices, similar slavery practices to slavery and servitude and removal. As you notice, really it's a very complicated definition. Why? Because if you come back to the definition, and as a student, you can come back to the definition, there are what we call three constituent elements of this definition, which are, first of all, the acts, the means, and the purpose. So if I come back once again to the definitions, if For instance, I give an example here. For instance, I'm working with an NGO and I receive somebody that I feel that he is a victim not of a normal violence, but there is another kind of violence. So first of all, when I'm making interview with that person, I have to ask these questions on the basis of the three constituent elements of the international definition. First of all, I ask that person in front of me to ask him or to ask her if he was recruited, if he was transported from an area to another area, if he or she was harbored or in a place, for instance, in a local in a local specific location, for instance. This is what we call the act, the first element, constituent elements. Once I establish, for instance, that I have one of the act elements, for instance, recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring. So I have to ask to look for the other constituent element, which is the means. What are the means used to recruit that person, to transport that person? The means, as I just mentioned, are threat, or use of force, or other forms of coercion, fraud, abductions, as I said, or the power or abuse of power, of vulnerability, or any kind of power, even family power, even power at the office, for instance, a governmental agent. And the term or the definition of power is very, very broad. So once I establish that there are one of the means mentioned in the definition, I have to ask more questions of the purpose, which is exploitation. Exploitation is a key constituent element in the definition, because once I establish that that person was recruited and we use one of the means, which perhaps it could be just a threat of abuse or a threat of use of force or force. And I have that element of, which is a mean. I ask more questions about the situation of that person, if she or he was exploited. And I emphasize on having more elements to establish what kind of exploitation. Sorry, it could be sexual exploitation. It could be any form of other forms of sexual exploitation. It could be forced labor. It could be slavery. And just let me emphasize on something that it's not, we are not looking for all the elements to meet all the elements to identify that the person is in front of me is a victim. If once I have one element from act, one element from means, and one element from the purpose, it means that in front of a person who is or she is not only victim of normal violence, but no, it's victim of human trafficking. Another element which is important on the definition of human trafficking is the consent of a victim of human trafficking. Normally, once we establish that that person were under the use of means, it means that that person is not consent, and nobody, as I say, because I'm teaching a module on human trafficking at the university at the master level, as I say to my student, nobody will be happy to be consent to be exploited for prostitution, or exploited to be in forced labor, or exploited to remove his organs. It means, or nobody, if it happens, if the person is consent, there is no human trafficking. But once the person, we use all this means, we force that person to go to prostitution, we use abuse of power to push that person to give organs. So if the key element also in the definition is consent. Sorry, because I'm a lawyer, I am emphasizing on this definition. But what is now smuggling of migrants? Smuggling of migrants, as you know, there is once again international definition in this in the first protocol I come back, the United Nations Conventions on Organized Crime has 3 protocols. One protocol concerning smuggling of migrants, another protocol on human trafficking, and another protocol on the use of illicit weapons. And coming back once again to international definition, now I give just very, very quickly the definition of smuggling of migrants, which migrant smuggling is the facilitation for financial or other material gain. Facilitation of what? Facilitation of irregular entry into a country where the migrant is not a national or resident or permanent resident. So both human trafficking and smuggling of migrants, they are qualified as transnational organized crimes. This is why, before talking about the differences or commonalities between both organized crimes, it's very important first to give that definitions I mentioned now. Now, coming back to what are the differences between human trafficking and smuggling of migrants. There are levels. I mean, if you come back to what we call the literature on human trafficking and smuggling of migrants, all the, scholars' contributions, United Nations work, and the reports and studies, they are making like a comparison or to distinguish between smuggling on human trafficking on the basis of some elements. Start first with the geography. When we talk about smuggling of migrants, it involves the crossing of international borders. I mean, it's a transnational crime. However, human trafficking, it could be national and transnational crime. It means that it could, trafficking may occur entirely within the border, within the border of a country, given country, and it could be also transnational crime. Another element, so first of all, geography. Secondly, purpose. The purpose, when we talk about smuggling of migrants, as migrant smuggling acts, is to obtain a financial or material benefit. I give an example. For instance, I want to go to Portugal and I don't have the travel document, and I want to go, in a regular way. So I contact what we call in French a passeur, somebody who is going to help me to enter to Portugal in a regular way. So I have this contact with that person. It could be an individual, it could be a network, and I give him money or other material benefits or another benefit to help me to cross Moroccan border to enter to Portugal, for instance. So in terms of purpose, the purpose of smuggling of migrants just is to obtain that financial or material benefits. However, trafficking in persons is the exploitation of the victim. And sure, you can ask me, and there is also a benefit, sure, but the benefit is coming after exploiting that persons. It could be an exploitation, as I said in the definition, in prostitution, in forced labor, in some acts similar to slavery. So I exploit that person, and after I gain after exploiting that person. So it's a bit different. The purpose between smuggler and the person who is going to help him, for instance, if I come to smuggling, is the contact just, I contact somebody, I'm looking for a person that is going to help me to cross the border, and I am consent, I give him or I give her or I give the network the money, and they help me, and after that there is no contact with that person, no exploitation. However, as I said, in human trafficking, there is a continuing relationship based on the exploitation of the victims, and of course, the final purpose after that exploitation is, as I said, is the gain. This is why we find that human trafficking is the third trade in the world after drug and weapons, illicit weapons. Sorry.
Yes, thank you so much for your answer. I would go to the next question because we have limited time, but the explanation was amazing.
Good.
Thank you very much. I think we were all clear. So can you tell me why are migrant people the most vulnerable to this kind of exploration? And if they are always aware, even if they are victims of this type of exploration?
Yes, as you said, if they are already aware. My work with civil society, for instance, we receive victims that are not aware that they are victims, and this is very, very important element. They think that they are victim only of what I call normal violence, but after making the interview on the basis of the definition, as I said, we can find that persons are victims. So coming back to your questions, of course there are factors. What I call general factors and some specific factors. I mean, what we call push factors, specific factors in each country. Let me talk in general about, I mean, internationally, if I can say, factors behind that make people vulnerable to human trafficking. There is what I call systematic inequalities within societies, and sometimes conflicts. Do you know that amongst forced displacement occurring now in Ukraine, there are victims? We start getting identifying some victims of human trafficking. Of course, sometimes in some countries there is extreme poverty, and if I come back to the case of Morocco, lack of access to education, job opportunities, and if I allow me to mention the cases of women, as you know, if I can answer from a gender perspective, the role, societal or social roles played with women in some countries, it could be a factor that women can be very, very easily victims of human trafficking. I mean, here I'm talking about access to employment for these women, access to education for these women, their position within the families, how is the contact with the male within a family or inside the society, what we call in the gender literature public sphere and private sphere. So in some societies, the situation of women within societies, it could be a push factor that with these women are victims of human trafficking. In some countries, the extreme poverty and this, as I said, these inequalities, and sometimes how we can perceive, as I said, women and girls within a society that make these women very, very easily to recruit, if I can. So there are many factors in general: social, cultural, economic, political, as I said, factors that could be behind the recruitment of victims of human trafficking.
Professor, but so as a Moroccan citizen, sorry, as a Moroccan citizen and as a jurist, can you shed some light on why there are so many Moroccans risking their lives in the sea so they can reach Europe? It's more or less the same thing. Is the thing about women, the socio-economic, they are refugees, economic refugees? What is the main reason that you know?
Yes. This is another issue. Just I want to distinguish between migrants. Sorry, because I'm a professor, all the time. For me, it's very important to define or to give a definition to concepts. When we are talking about migrants, it's different that we are talking about refugees. And within migrants, not all migrants are smuggling migrants. That's I want to highlight. Anyway, because we don't have enough time. Coming back to your questions. Sure, there are what we call the drivers, what we call also, push factors, particularly Europe, what we call the El Dorado, is an attractive, continent for youth, particularly from Morocco. If I take the case of Morocco, here we are talking particularly about irregular migrants who are for economic reasons, particularly for economic reasons, looking to reach Europe, to looking for welfare in Europe. And there is another, in general, it could be, as I said, economic reasons, social reasons, sometimes this is the dream, what I call psychology behind all this. And in front of this push factors, they are what we are calling the pull factors. The pull factors, it means that, wow, Europe is attractive, is a land where we can find opportunity to have access to rights. Another element which is very important, this is, I mean, how to what extent youth, for example, youth enjoyment of rights within their home countries. So for not only for Moroccan youth, but for many youth from the South, they see in Europe as countries of democracy, countries of human rights, respecting human rights. It could be an attractive element that attract people to go. But mainly, if I come to the case of Morocco, mainly people are have this dream to go to Europe just to have access to employment, to have what we call here, most of them are economic migrant, not economic refugees, because as you know, refugee is another definition. If we come back to Geneva Convention, we have a very, very clear definition who is a refugee. A refugee is a person who has a well-founded fear of being persecuted. His fear of being persecuted is a form of forced migration, and that person in a given context has this fear of being persecuted for many reasons, and this persecution is linked to what we call 5 reasons. That person is for instance, is forced to flee here or her home country because has this well-founded fear of being persecuted for many reasons, as I said, of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, and membership in a particular social group. Coming back once again to your question about that you call economic refugees, no, it's not true. We don't have this term in international at the international definition. We have only refugees on the grounds of these 5 reasons. Coming back to your questions concerning Morocco. Morocco, as you know, Morocco is not a country of conflicts. Is not a country. It means that we don't have many asylum seekers going to Europe or other countries to ask for asylum. But recently we noticed some cases from Morocco asking for asylum, particularly in Spain or in some countries on the basis of membership to a particular social group. I mean, particularly because of their sexual identity. Here I'm talking about homosexual, lesbians, and so on. We have cases particularly of men who requested asylum in some European countries on the basis of this well-founded fear of being persecuted because they belong to a particular social group. And you know, Morocco is a Muslim country, is really a traditional, country that do not accept this kind of sexual identity differences, you understand me. So we noticed this as a form, let me say, as a reason of asking asylum in some countries. And also recently, I'm talking here 3-4 years ago, we started, some Moroccans started asking asylum for political reasons because they have particularly youth. After the Arab Spring, some Moroccan youth start asking asylum, particularly in France, and I think in Spain also, on the basis of a well-founded fear of being persecuted on the basis of their political opinion. But generally, most of that I want you to keep, most Moroccan migrants are irregular migrants, irregular migrants that want to enter Europe with the hope to have an opportunity to have access to work and better life, and also for some of them having access to full enjoyment of rights. And this is the case of refugees for political reasons.
Okay, so can I ask a follow-up question?
Mm-hmm.
So you were talking about people, for example, from the LGBTQ community that are growing and starting to ask for asylum. We had a case of a Moroccan woman that came here to Portugal, and she was pregnant. And they asked her why she left. And she said it was because she was pregnant, but she was not married. Could this be a reason to ask for asylum, the asylum statute?
Yes, it could be a reason on the basis, if I come back to the definition, it could be a reason on the basis of membership in a particular social group. It means that this women can be seen as a category of women, particular social group of women that are pregnant outside marriage. And for Moroccan, society, it could be not good seen, if I can see. Okay, but there are many elements. To establish that, as you know, in the refugee definition, once again, there are what I call the case constituent element. If I come to international definition, first of all, that the person is outside of his or her country of residence. Okay, this woman, she's outside. And we have to establish if this woman has a well-founded fear of being persecuted. Unfortunately, international definition, we don't have a exact definition what we mean by persecution. If I come back to some scholars, they are giving definition of persecution compared on the basis of a human rights violation. So if this lady has this well-founded fear, well-founded is a psychological side here. She has this fear. If she come back to Morocco, she can be a victim of stigma. She can be I don't know her situation within her family, and so on. So once another element, this case is very important. As I said, we have to establish that this lady has a persecution on the basis of 4 reasons. Here, the reason particularly, it could be membership in a particular social group, okay? And another element which is very important in the international definition is that her country cannot provide her the protection we provide to all citizens within the country. You understand me? So we have to establish all these key elements at the same time. Okay, if you give me just this information that the lady, she's pregnant, she's not good seen in Morocco, but we have to establish how Moroccan government, here I'm talking about the level, high level, how Moroccan government deals with this category of women. Okay, if the Moroccan government can provide protection to these women, yes, Moroccan government can provide protection to this kind of women. I'm sorry to say kind of women who are pregnant. Who are pregnant, okay? Here, just for instance, in Casablanca, I'm living in Casablanca, we have many organizations, civil society organizations that are providing assistance, protection, and with the support of Moroccan government to women who are pregnant outside marriage. So it's not a reason to be persecuted. And another element in the definition of asylum, allow me to say that, if what we call the principle of non-refoulement. Non-refoulement, it means that anybody comes to your country to ask for asylum, you shouldn't. We have this obligation. Non-refoulement is a custom rule. We have this obligation to not to let coming back that person to a country where his life is threatened, or where he or she can be a victim of torture. So, if you want, for example, to give an answer to that lady, you have to establish at the same time all these elements. She's outside, okay. If she has a well-founded fear, sure, she has a well-founded fear of being persecuted. But here, persecution is coming from whom? From her family or from her Moroccan government. Because Moroccan government, as I said, is providing assistance. There is a recognition of these women who are pregnant. So it's not a governmental or it's not a state problem, if I can say. So we have to establish all these elements at the same time.
Professor, but you were talking about the Moroccan government. So can you tell us a bit about the Moroccan policies regarding not this kind of situation of the women, but the human trafficking situation in the Mediterranean, and what are their policies and the points that need some change in your point of view?
Well, how Moroccan government dealing with trafficking in persons is very recent, you know. Why I say is very recent, if comparing to the fact we had victims of human trafficking. Let me explain that. We have what we call a turning point on dealing with migration in general, including human trafficking, which is 2013. 2013, we have a new policy on immigration. I'm here emphasizing on terms. Immigration, it means that persons that are living in Morocco, I mean, foreigners in Morocco, we have a new policy on immigration and asylum. Well, what happened? Before that date, before 2013, there were no recognition on about human trafficking. We have cases of human trafficking, sure. Coming back to international reports, US Department reports, UK Home Office reports, Amnesty, and so on. But Moroccan government did not recognize the phenomena. I remember 2009, I did a research on the situation of violence of migrant and refugee women in Morocco. And I noticed while making the interviews that there are cases of migrant and refugee women victims of not what I call normal violence. No, they are victims of kind of violence which I couldn't identify myself. I was a researcher at that time. I not having, let me say modestly, this experience now. But when I made the interview with some Moroccan, representative of Moroccan government, they said, no, this is a violence amongst migrants. And we have also violence about, amongst Moroccan women living in some Gulf states. This is a violence. We cannot give another definition to what is happening to these persons. But for me, no, it's not normal persons. At that time, I used to work for the ministry in charge of Moroccan living abroad. And I'm talking about before 2013, we received cases from some Gulf states, from civil society in some, working with women in Gulf states, and they reported that these women are victims of human trafficking. And when we were talking, for instance, to our, to the hierarchy, for example, the directors or even the secretary general at that time of the ministry, they said, no, this is violence. This is not a form of human trafficking. So there is, it was a taboo in Morocco. What happened in 2013, Morocco has a new policy, which comes to respond to the Moroccan commitments at the international level. Morocco is a state party to many conventions on human rights, on migration. Morocco is one of the first countries ratified the UN Convention on the protection of migrants, workers, and members of their families. Morocco is part of, at the regional level, anyway, many conventions on human rights, on 1951 Geneva Convention on refugee status of refugees. So it was time. I need another, a meeting to explain more about the Moroccan policy, but there were a context that it was time to fulfill their commitments towards migrants and refugees. And we noticed one of key elements, what I'm calling the main component of the new policy in 2013, is to upgrade the legal and institutional framework on immigration, asylum, and human trafficking. And this is the first time there is international recognition that, yes, we have this phenomena. We have victims of human trafficking amongst Moroccan community abroad, amongst migrants living in Morocco, and it's time to establish, to develop or to have this a law, to enact a law on human trafficking. So this is why in 2000, in the frame of this policy, we enacted law number 2714. I had the opportunity to be committee, and finally we have this official recognition, and we have a law was passed in 2016, and law now is is respected, at the level of courts, and we have many cases. And
Professor,
if I can share,
I'm very sorry to interrupt. Yeah. We are running out of time. And I would just ask you if I could do a conclusion to this podcast. Okay, I'm so sorry. I wish we had more time to do more questions. I just wanted to say that concludes the podcast for today. Professor Bahija, it was a pleasure to have the opportunity to meet you and speak with you about such a current and relevant subject that should be brought to everyone's attention for sure. Thank you very much for being here with us today. And for the rest of our audience, we see you in the next podcast. And you can find us in NOVA Refugee Clinic website and social media.